Chapter 2, Section 5 is about solving equations with absolute value. So the first thing I want to go over is what is absolute value. So the simplest way to think of absolute value is that it is a number's distance from zero. And the thing about absolute value is that it is going to be the same for both positive and negative numbers. So if a, or a number, is greater than 0, so like 5 or 10 or something like that, that's going to be a specific distance away from 0. But if you went the other direction and you went to -5 or -10, you're still going the same distance away from 0. Distance is never going to be a negative number. When you're measuring distance of a trip that you're going to take, or if you're measuring the distance from one wall to another wall within a house, or you're trying to build something and you're trying to measure out the distance of pieces of wood that you're going to need to put together, you're never going to have a negative amount of material or a negative amount of miles that you're going to have to travel. So distance is always going to be a positive number. So when you have something within an absolute value, and it comes out, it's going to be made positive or it's going to stay positive. So if the absolute value already has a positive quantity inside, so let's say I have the absolute value of 5, that's still going to equal 5. Now if I have the absolute value of -5, that's going to become positive 5. So it's still going to come out as that positive number. So that's why when you think about absolute value, you always need to remember that we're talking about distance from 0, which distance is never going to be negative. Now in this section here, what we're going to talk about is how to solve absolute value equations. Now you've already been solving equations this chapter that involve one-step and two-step type problems. The thing with absolute value is that you not only have to set up one equation, but you have to set up a separate equation, a second one, and solve that one as well. Because there are more than one value that could go in for x here, because it's an absolute value, and cause me to get a positive 7 to come out. Just like if I put in 5 or -5, I still got 5 as my answer, so there were two ways to get there because of the absolute value bars. To set up your equations, the first one is going to look exactly how it looks right now. You're just going to drop the absolute value bars. So it's going to say x plus 9 equals 7. The other equation, everything's going to stay the same as far as the x plus 9, but it's going to equal -7 instead of positive 7. So then what we're going to do is solve for x. So on the left-hand side, I'm going to subtract 9. So x is going to equal -2. On the other side, we're still going to solve the same way. We're going to subtract that 9. But this time, you're going to do -7 minus 9, which would be -16. Now, if you think about checking your work here, if I took absolute value of -2 plus 9, this would become 7 within absolute value bars, which is still going to just be 7. So that one checks. And if we do -16 in there, so -16 plus 9, that is -7, but because it's in absolute value bars, it does come out as positive 7. So it also checks. So that's why we have to make sure for these types of problems that we set up two equations and solve both of them to get two answers. Now, to graph these on a number line, I look for 3 points on your number line. I just want to make sure you guys can graph these numbers correctly in relation to where 0 would be. So in my number lines here, I'm going to have to put these two solutions, and I'm going to have to put 0. Now both of my answers here are negative, and you put the bigger number farthest to the left because it would be getting more and more negative, or smaller, which would mean it would be farther away from 0. So -16 needs to go way over on the left side. -2 then needs to go in the middle here, and 0 needs to go on the right side. And the last thing that we want to do is just put solution points on those two numbers. So what I want you guys to do right now is pause the video and take a minute to do this practice problem. And if you want to try the next practice problem as well, that one is going to be a little bit more of a two-step equation when you go to solve it. But try those two and then keep watching to see how they should have worked out. So for this first one, I set up my two equations, x minus 6 equals 12, and x minus 6 equals -12. We're going to add 6 to both sides. Again, you're going to do that on both of these equations. The really nice thing about absolute value equations is that when you're solving them, the solving process looks very similar. One answer you should have gotten here was 18. And the other one you should have gotten is -6. Then for the number line, -6 should go to the left, 0 should be in the middle, 18 should be on the right. Now for that second practice problem, your equation should have looked like 8w plus 5 equals 21, and 8w plus 5 equals -21. So for both of these, I start by subtracting 5 from both sides of my equation. So we have 8w equals 21 minus 5 would be 16, divided by 8 would be 2. On the other side, you have 8w equals -26. Now, -26 is not easily divisible by 8, but it can be reduced by taking a 2 out of both. So I would reduce that to -13/4, but I would leave it as a fraction. When you go to graph this one, that -13/4 needs to go onto the left, 0 needs to go in the middle, 2 needs to go on the right. Now with all of those problems, like I showed you on that first one, you could have checked your answers by taking the numbers that you got, plugging them back into your original equation, and making sure that you got the number on the outside of the absolute value bars to balance out. And both of those would have worked out if you had gone back and checked those. But I do want to talk to you about a special case here, and I want to show you why it's really important that you are checking your work to make sure that it does work out, because if it doesn't, then we have to talk about how you throw out certain numbers if they're not good. So for this first one here, we've got the absolute value of 2a plus 7 equals a minus 4. I'm going to start by writing out my two equations. Now, the one that we start with looks exactly the same, but we just dropped the absolute value bars. The other one is going to look the same, except remember that you always have to change the sign of the term on the other side of the equal sign. But this one has two terms. It has a minus 4. So we need to switch both of their signs so that a is going to become -a and the 4 is going to become +4. Now we also are dealing with equations that have variables on both sides here, so we need to try to combine them together in order to get them to be on the same side, like my letters on the same side and my numbers on the same side. So for this first one, I'm going to start by subtracting a. So now I have a plus 7 equals -4. Then I'm going to subtract 7. And so I have a equals -15. I'm sorry, -11. On the other side, this I'm going to add a. So I have 3a plus 7 equals 4. Then I'm going to subtract 7. So I have 3a equals negative 3. Then I divide by 3. And I get a equals negative 1. So far, looks fine. Looks very similar to what we were doing before, just a little bit more work with solving those equations. However, if I go back and I start to check my work here, so for that first one, if I do 2 times negative 11 plus 7 equals negative 11 minus 4, if I were to try to simplify this, over here on the left-hand side, you'd have 2 times negative 11, which is negative 22, plus 7, which is going to be negative 15. And over here I have negative 11 minus 4, which is negative 15. However, when I do the absolute value, this becomes positive 15, which is not the same thing as negative 15. So those are not equal to each other, which means that negative 11 was a bad answer. So I actually have to get rid of it. Now something similar happens with negative 1. When I plug that in, 2 times negative 1 plus 7 equals negative 1 minus 4. I get the absolute value here of 5 equals negative 5. And I'm left with another not true sentence. So I also have to throw out the negative 1. So in this case, there is no solution for this problem because when I went back and checked my work, neither of them actually followed through and balanced out the equation on both sides. And I could almost tell you that when you are doing a problem like this, if you ever see a negative number on the side that's opposite of the absolute value side, it's going to be a no solution. Because when you're dealing with absolute value, your answers should always come out to be positive. So if you ever see a negative number on the other side, it's not following the rules that we have for absolute value. Now, the next and last thing I want to talk about in this section is if you're writing out an absolute value equation. So in these problems, they might either describe a situation to you using words, or they might give you a number line. The steps for writing an absolute value equation are fairly simple. The first step that you want to do is find the middle of your numbers. To do that, you need to look at your solutions or your find like your average. So if a problem is talking about average cost, average temperature, average points per game, that's going to be this first step of your problem. If you're given something on a number line, you're going to have to add your two solutions together and divide it by 2 in order to find the middle. And that's the same thing as finding the average. Step number 2 then is to find the distance from the middle to the other solutions or the other numbers on the problem. Then what you do is create your absolute value equation using this form right here. It's always going to be the absolute value of x minus your middle number, and then you set that equal to the distance to your numbers. So for this example, I have a solution at negative 4 and 16. Sorry, positive 4 and 16. Step 1 is to find my middle. So I'm going to do 4 plus 16 and divide that by 2 to find my average. So this would be 20 divided by 2, which is 10. 10 is going to be the middle then. Step is to find the distance your middle is from your two solutions. Probably the easiest way to do that would be to take the biggest solution, so the one over here on the right, so 16, and subtract the middle, which is 10, to get your distance of 6. Then you're going to write out your absolute value equation. So you'll have absolute value of x minus your middle number, which is the number you found in step 1, so x minus 10, equals 6. So what I want you guys to do is there's 2 practice problems here. Pause the video, give both of these practice problems a try, and then come back to make sure that you got the right equation written. So for this first one, I would start by taking negative 14 plus negative 8 and dividing it by 2 to find the middle. That comes out to be negative 11. Step 2 is to find your distance. So negative 8 minus negative 11 would end up actually being positive 3. Remember, distance should never be negative. So when you write your absolute value equation, it should say x minus negative 11 equals 3. Because the middle was a negative number, and I've got double negatives in my absolute value here, I'm actually going to switch that to a positive 11 to clean up that problem a little bit. And this would be the equation that represents that number line up above. For the second practice problem, I would start by taking negative 5 plus 3, divide that by 2, and you get negative 1. To find your distance, 3 minus negative 1 would be 4. So we have x minus negative 1 equals 4. And once again, I've got double negatives, so I would switch that to x plus 1 equals 4. Now these last couple of problems are still having you write an absolute value equation, but this time they are giving you a situation that involves words that we have to read through before we can write our equation out. So you are driving to Omaha at an average speed of 70 miles per hour, give or take 5 miles per hour for traffic patterns. Find your minimum and maximum speed. Write an absolute value equation to represent your speed. So I'm going to start by writing the equation first. So you always do absolute value of x minus your middle, which the average speed is 70. So it's going to be x minus 70. And we set that equal to the 5, the give or take 5. So there's our equation. Now to solve this, you would set up your two equations like we were doing earlier. X minus 70 equals 5. X minus 70 equals negative 5. When you solve both of those, you're going to add 70 over. And so you're going to have 75 miles per hour for your top speed, and then 65 miles per hour for your minimum speed. So read through this practice problem, give this one a try, and then continue to watch the video to see what this last problem should have looked like. So the equation you should have written should have said x minus 80, because 80 is the average temperature. And we set that equal to 10, because that's the give or take amount. Then to set up our two equations, we have x minus 80 equals 10, and x minus 80 equals negative 10. And when you solved those, you should have gotten 90 degrees for the high and 70 degrees for the low.